Hello and welcome to Convex, where we are celebrating experiment-driven marketing. My name is Paresh and I'm the Director of Marketing at VWO. For those of you who haven't heard about VWO, VWO is an experience optimization and a growth platform, the only connected platform that enables organizations to optimize their entire end-to-end audience journey. You can check us out at vwo.com. I'm excited to be hosting Ben LeBay today for this session, who is the Research Director at Conversion Excel. Welcome, Ben, and it's great to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks, Paresh. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited.
Great. All right. So before Ben begins his presentation, I want to inform all of you that you can join the Convex official networking group at LinkedIn and ask your questions from this presentation there. That being said, Ben, the stage is all yours.
Thanks, Paresh. Hi, everyone. Well, today I want to get into voice of customer research, effectively our playbook at the agency and what I supervise most directly. When we bring in clients, to help with their optimization programs, digging into the qualitative data, digging into voice of customer is key in what we want to do. But before I jump in, I'll kind of just set the stage for this talk. It's roughly put into two parts. The second part is highly tactical, going through a lot of frameworks and templates and questions and kind of rapid fire through our voice of customer playbook. But the beginning is rather strategic. So I don't want us to rely on tactical growth alone within our programs, our testing programs, or our research programs. And so the beginning is a bit strategic in the sense of going through some mental models that I use in conducting successful research. You see, my background is not explicitly in marketing. I've only been in with Conversion Excel for 4 years, and before that, I was doing a lot of research. Also doing a lot of fishing. Here is a fish that I got caught pretty recently, along with my belly there. But I'm not per se a marketer. My background, my academic background is in behavioral, evolutionary behavior and conservation science. I worked in academia for 10 years prior to kind of jumping over into marketing. And effectively, what I bridged over from that previous career was to doing effective research. And there's a lot of pitfalls in doing research, and so that's what I want to get into first in terms of what I carry over into the world of conversion rate optimization and running successful research programs that support effective testing, experimentation, and hypothesis-driven testing, right? So that's where the transition to get into these mental models for conducting successful research. But before I jump in, I want to talk about this fish. Actually, it's pretty common in the U.S. as well as in Europe. It's known as a European redfin, or a river perch, yellow perch, a perche jaune in France, where this was caught. It's known by a lot of names, but weirdly, if I was to try to catch this fish, or if I was to try to study and conserve this fish, knowing these names actually doesn't help me at all. The names of this fish really speak to understanding the people that give this fish the name rather than the fish itself. And this speaks to my mental model number one. Knowing the name of something is not the same as knowing something. This is kind of a simple statement, but it's very powerful in the sense that, in marketing, we're familiar with this concept in some different language or some different nomenclature. For example, System 1 versus System 2, this is what this speaks to, the reptilian brain versus the mammalian brain, that whole behavioral psychology part of marketing and how we're applying things. But what this really speaks to is that we really suck as marketers at communicating. We're really good at characterizing our products, but we're not good so much at characterizing customer pain. See, we think that we sell products, but we really don't. We sell customer success. Kodak thought that they sold film, but they did not, and they ran out of business. Nokia thought that they sold, phone hardware, but they didn't. They forgot that they thought that they did, but they really didn't. And so this can be really, really powerful. Let's look at how it applies in a simple case on a eCommerce homepage, landing page. This is a brand that we work with, Procter & Gamble brand called Native Deodorant. They sell natural deodorants, kind of organic deodorants, if you will. Here's a landing page where we see a value proposition: deodorant to stay fresh and clean. It's not very satisfying, really. It's very it characterizes the product, but it doesn't, again, speak to that customer pain. Changing that value proposition to where it does speak to customer pain is a massive win. So deodorant without the chemistry experiment. This speaks to why someone buys natural deodorant, to not pollute their body. And this is a huge win. So again, that mental model, the name of something, you don't let that distract from what the something is and what it represents, especially to your customer. Mental model number 2, this is my favorite. Knowledge is equal to experience plus sensitivity. This is really powerful. If you ever find yourself saying that you don't like something, you need to think about this mental model. But in research and understanding when tactics apply, this is where it becomes really powerful. This is where this mental model is where best practices and guidelines go to die. For example, we just published hundreds of e-commerce best practice guidelines on our website. And if I were to give you, 12 guidelines for e-commerce homepage design that were successful in, such and such use case and case study, if you were to go and apply these to your product and to your site, would that be successful? And the answer is likely not. So you need to understand how these tactics apply across, and how they're sensitive to a breadth of experience for it to really matter, right? So let's take another example. Here is a landing page for a company that we work with. I have to anonymize this one, but they're a payroll company out of the US, really, Fortune 500. And this is the tip of the spear in terms of, bringing in a lot of leads. And if you look at this, it's a start quote button with an email field. And you would think that this breaks a lot of common best practices, and it does. We're breaking kind of foot in the door technique with that email field friction that it adds. We're breaking some of that sunk cost fallacy and how to leverage that. And if we were to run it with just that, against a treatment with just the start quote button, removing that email, you would think that it would be a better kind of way to go. But in fact, it's not. It was a massive loser. And the reason is that, again, it goes against a little bit of that common best practice way of thinking. That email field actually provides a little bit of friction, but in a sense where it stops somebody and it makes them start to engage more and scroll down and start to wade through the additional content and the value associated with that content below the fold, and then come back up and enter their email and start the quote. So here's where a best practice doesn't quite apply, and it would lose massively. So again, when you're trying to apply tactic, best practice, a guideline, know that you need to understand that you don't know that it works until you understand how it applies across and how it's sensitive across a bunch of different situations. So back to the fish. Let's say that we do have the sensitivity. Let's say that we know this fish. Of course, we know the name, but we know where it eats. We know where it lives. We know, what makes it, what allows it to breed and be successful and all that kind of stuff. So the question is, would this help me to catch the fish? And would it help me to conserve, study and conserve the fish? And the answer to this is no. And that leads me to my third mental model. It is not enough to know. So my grandfather used to say with regards to fish that, you can't catch a fish without a line in the water. As marketers, we are very good at collecting data, analyzing data. We're very good at creating plans with data, but we suck at implementation. We suck at the action part, at the movement part. And this is really key in terms of transitioning it, all of the interesting data points that you're gathering and creating some action and creating some results, right? And this is especially poignant for human communication, right? If you think about how conversations work, you can't, it's not enough to know. You have to show that you know. You have to be sympathetic to your audience, and know when to hit them up and when not to. Think about human communication and the people and the situations where it excels worldwide. What does it take to be the best at communicating? Think about comedy. With comedy, it's thought timing is really key. What about art? It's thought historical and cultural perspective is key. What about advertising? It's generally thought that it needs to be extremely memorable. In all of these cases, they're beautiful applications of context. So you need to hit the customer at the right time. You need to have the right perspective and talk to them in the right place and the right time. And then you need to have contextual memory, connect brand value with their own personal value, right? So you need to, again, show that hit them up at the right time. So what are some examples of this? Here's a brand that we work with, Curtis Simmons, direct-to-consumer brand, mattress in a box type of company. They came to us with, starting out with this product and this brand, and we helped them with regards to understanding their customer quite a bit, and then helped them with regards to some design and testing. They were sending people directly to the product detail page, which is the screen on the right, really quickly, but they had a ton of great content down below. We kind of changed up the user flow, allowed people to kind of seamlessly wade through those additional content pieces down below, doubled the engagement time, and also doubled revenue per visitor. Tested this a ton. This was a great success for us. Another example of this in terms of the timing type of thing, this is that Procter & Gamble brand, native deodorant. Here with deodorant, people are used to buying it. Really high conversion rates, too high actually. Our focus is not conversion rate, it's actually average order value, lifetime value, that kind of thing. And so we're hitting people up at the right time, the right people with the right offer. As people are on product page, they transition to cart, or they're on the cart, transitioning to checkout, or they've just checked out. They're, maybe they see a one-click upsell, upgrade, something like that. Cross-sell, upsells, as we've spent years testing this. And it leads to, if we turn off these tests, it's like 8K a day that this would start to lose, $250,000 a month that this contributes to. And so a lot of different ways that we think about this and personalize these cross-sells and upsells. When to speak to somebody, how to speak to them, what type of value that you're giving them depending on who they are. That's what this third mental model is meant to. You need to show that you understand where to add value to them when they need it. So this is the transition into the second part of the talk, where I get really tactical and start to speed through a lot of these templates and questions and our voice of customer playbook that we use at the agency. Context for this, the standard rubric for marketing is this 1, 2, 3, the audience, message, and action. The perspective here has nothing to do really with message and action. It has all to do with the audience and understanding 4 key pillars of the audience: perceptions, behaviors, motivations, and anxieties. This is what we want to know, and the keyword being know. Want to have knowledge about, right? And the way that we do that, to understand, to know these 4 pillars, we use very surgical techniques to get there. Surveys, UX benchmarking, for example, to understand users and their perceptions, user testing to understand friction and behavior, etc. And so we'll be walking through this real quick with some examples and templates and such, starting with users and perceptions. So with user perceptions, through a digital buying experience, what we use is UX benchmarking. And for better or for worse, the common one that we all know about is NPS, Net Promoter Score. We see these implemented through little widgets like this, a little pop, little Likert scale questions, how likely are you to recommend? We see a lot of great success implementing this through SMS, doubling, tripling the response rate. So try this if you're not. But okay, this is all NPS. This is a UX benchmark on one dimension of user experience, and that dimension is loyalty. And how likely are you to recommend a friend is not the only question that you can ask here. So there's another one that we like as well. I will likely visit this website in the future. And again, this is all loyalty, one dimension of user experience, but there are other dimensions of user experience, including credibility or trust. appearance, that aesthetic part of their experience and their experience. Usability. So that pure usability is easy to use. Together, this question set is a standardized survey known as SuperQ. This was developed from Jeff Sorrow out of Measuring You. And it's a really powerful standardized survey, again, to get at the multi-dimensionality of user experience. We worked with Jeff to expand the SuperQ. We're a conversion rate optimization shop. We work with a lot of clients and with their success and value propositions, and these metrics, these dimensions of user experience sort of didn't quite address that. So we worked with Jeff to add a fifth dimension, clarity. This speaks to why, the questions here, why I clearly understand why I should buy from this website instead of its competitors. Again, speaking to that success proposition and the customer, do they understand that or not? Real powerful. You can do these types of things, similar to NPS and little pop-ups. You can do the whole thing at once. It takes, a panel and some time for your people to go through a big standardized survey like that. Typically, NPS, for example, is implemented longitudinally in a lot of cases. So through time, maybe pre and post design change or something like that. Where we like to apply it is competitively. So here's a link here to a study that we did recently and published recently on our blog, where we did a competitive UX benchmark on 4 beauty and cosmetic shops: Clinique, Lush, Sephora, and Fresh. And this is really cool. So in this case, we're able to see how these sites fall relative to each other in these different dimensions of user experience, right, and user perception. And we're able then to adjust the roadmaps and the priorities of the tests, and then especially a lot of the tests that speak to brand positioning, changing user perceptions of the testing program. So yeah, gives you a taste of that. So quick win, if you're doing this type of stuff, you need panels. Amazon MTurk is great for US audiences and US companies and products. Clickworker is a really good one to get panels for out of Europe. But Amazon MTurk, super powerful. Just a quick heads up, if you haven't gone there in a while, a couple of years ago, they had maybe 2 premium qualifications. You could target iPhone users, Android users. Now it's exploded. You can target a ton of people. Online purchase histories of music and jewelry, financial assets owned, employment, industry, all sorts of cool stuff. So this is all self-reported. You got to keep that in mind and kind of do some vetting and understand that limitation, but really powerful tool nonetheless. So into friction, behavior, understanding customer behavior as they go through these user journeys. We use user testing as well as some passive feedback. For user testing, I'm not going to go into the details of actually conducting user testing, but if you're a big shop, if you're an agency for sure, you want to invest in a moderated in-person setup. I provided a link to a really cool article that allows you to hack together one from UX Collective there. On the right here, for the bang for the buck, moderated or unmoderated remote user testing, validately.com, usertesting.com, Userlytics, these types of companies are really great to do that. I will go over the real quick common mistakes that we see with user testing. One, the wrong users. You don't want people that have gone through your journey before. The whole idea behind user testing is to watch people trip, so you want to identify those tripwires. If they've already done that, they'll avoid the tripwires. And of course, you need to target the demographics and who's your audience, right? Another mistake, trying to get data on user perceptions. This is a huge one. I see this again and again and again. We're not asking questions with user testing. We're observing behavior. We're only doing we're only doing these sessions with 5 or 10 people. If you're trying to get data on perceptions, that's what surveys, that's what the UX benchmarking is for, polls, things like that. User testing is for observing behavior, not getting data on perceptions. Leading text questions and tasks, you don't want to get too specific there. You want to just provide them with a kernel of a task and see where they go with it. You don't want to bias your results. Launching and reviewing all of them at once, you don't want to do that. We do what's known as a 2x2 approach, where you maybe launch one on desktop, one on mobile, review, adjust, repeat. And then not accounting for the full range of customer intent, especially on mobile and just generally these days. The user intent comes into 4 buckets. I want to know, I want to go, I want to do, and I want to buy. Note the top 3 are all discovery stage. They're all information stage. The last one is the only one that's transactional in nature. So you want to keep this in mind when you're setting up your tasks. And your site might not have all 4. It might not have I want to go, for example, but you have to account for those nonetheless. When you're understanding customer friction, passive feedback is really key as well. On the right here, we've got or maybe on your left, we've got a feedback button. Usability made this really popular. A lot of different voice of customer platforms and customer experience platforms have this now. But making it easy for people to provide feedback when they have some friction points through your within your buying journey. This is really, really powerful. And with more sophisticated platforms like our partner platform with Usability, you can do some fun things. Here's an example of one of the clients, TUI travel shop out of the UK. They identified a massive bug after a code release on their Chrome extension that was hitting up revenue to the tune of I think £300,000 or £400,000 a week, and it was through this crowdsourced QA, this feedback button, that they were able to take screenshots of the issue, tie it to sessions, tie the HTML even within that session and send it to the right channel in the TUI team to address that and start to dive in and fix it really, really quick. So it can be really, really powerful to have these type of feedback mechanisms on your site to address customer friction points. Here's an example with Virgin and a native app. This, if the path of least resistance, if you have a problem on one of these apps, if they find it easy to go to the app store to provide that type of feedback and they're angry with it, they will. So you need to make it extremely easy to provide feedback within the app itself, good or bad. And if it's good, maybe send them to the app store and crank up those app store ratings, right? So now transitioning to bucket number 3, motivations and goals. Here we're using active surveys and polls. Here, starting out, is understanding user goals and user intent. Here's an example with another UK shop, Money Supermarket. Here, they're car insurance comparison site, and the team at Money Supermarket had aggressive goals new aggressive goals at trying to crank up sales on mobile specifically. But before they started to do anything, they set up this this top task type of goal. So what are you here to do today? And you can do this in a number of ways, but you can do it open-ended or closed-ended. This one's closed-ended, but they wanted to know generally what was the flavor of user intent on mobile, and also compare that to desktop. What they found was a big what's known as a mobile halo effect. So people on mobile in that discovery stage and then transitioning later on into desktop to pull the trigger. And it was an extreme case of this mobile halo effect to the tune of 80% or so of people on mobile didn't have a driver's license, let alone a car. So they really were not at that stage of buying yet. And this was inversed on desktop where they really were ready to pull the trigger. And so this completely changed the strategy for the team at Money Supermarket in terms of getting a lot more informative, a lot more conversational with the content of the mobile experience. Yeah. And in terms of understanding motivation, we want to do surveys here. Surveys are our best friend. First, identify who you want to speak to. The number one audience that we like to identify and understand their motivation is first-time customers. People that just recently went through the buying experience. They had the motivation to go through, and so we want to get them to describe that motivation and in their words, right? VIPs, the whales, what sets them apart, and also maybe something persona specific. You can send out the survey. You can conduct the survey in a lot of ways. You can hit them up on a thank you page. You can You can hit them up on SMS. You can hit them up with a pop-up, and then there's a survey link that go out to a different survey. We like email for bang for buck, and generally it works in a lot of ways. I won't go through the template here, but I will point out with one special thing on the subject line specifically. I see a lot of bad subject lines. You will increase your response rate if you're really explicit. So the formula or the format of what you get for what is what you want to do. So for example, get $5 store credit for 5 minutes of your time, something like that. Right. So questions in the survey. Typically we're asking 4 to 6 to 8 questions. You need to think about response rate there. So not too much. But not overlaying a ton of goals within a survey. So this survey is specific at motivation, and the types of questions that we ask, we want to get real specific in terms of translating the answers into test hypotheses to improve our testing program. So we've got a couple questions that speak to understanding the customer's perspective of what are the benefits of the product and the brand and the site and what they're getting. The first one is what matters to you most when buying this product online. 2, please list the top 3 things that made you purchase from this site. Then a couple questions that speak to understanding and getting information and some more data points for testing value proposition. What made you choose this site over other online stores, and what did you like most about your shopping experience with this site? Those are both really, really powerful at helping improve value propositions. Yeah. So lastly, customer anxiety, fears, uncertainties, and doubts. And for this, we use intercept polls and thank you page polls. Here's one of our clients, Dermalogica. We do a lot of work with the beauty and cosmetic space. Here is an example of poll, in this case, implemented on the left there. Is there anything holding you back from making a purchase today? Kind of an aggressive question. But it's just got that yes/no answer. So it's just as easy to click yes or no as it is to close out that survey. But if they hit yes, you see there on the right, we hit them up with an open-ended box to allow them to elaborate. And we're usually implementing this, product page cart somewhere where we're seeing an abnormal drop on the funnel. And so response rate here from 2 to 5, 7%, depending on the product and the audience and the brand, that kind of thing. If you want to improve your response rate, here's an example of Ticketmaster implemented through our partner Usabilla. This one, full screen takeover on a tablet in this case. This is when a customer is in checkout and actually hit that back button and go back to cart. So they're going the opposite way from what we want them to go. We hit them up with a real quick survey. In this case, it's why didn't you complete your purchase today? A little bit more aggressive in the sense of a full screen takeaway and that action. But the response rate goes up here. You're looking 5 to 10 to 15%. And then the third example, here's also one implemented with Usabilla, our voice of customer partner that we work with a lot. This one on the website KLM. So they just checked in and they ask them, is there any feedback? How easy? A few questions with regards to this. So this is post-purchase, getting some information there. Response rate here, believe it or not, on this one when it was implemented, 70%. So much so that KLM thought there was a bug in the Usabilla system. So that's the quick win for this section. Post-purchase surveys. There's little friction here. They've already made the transaction, and there's a lot of benefits to asking some questions here. One that we really like a lot: what almost prevented you from completing your purchase today? But there's some other questions there for you to play with as well. So went through a lot of examples there really quick. There's a lot of cases where we're collecting data and collecting a lot of data, a lot of open-ended data. And so I wanted to provide a slide in terms of how to process that. We get a lot of questions there. And so here, codification. When we're bringing in a lot of qualitative data, a lot of open-ended data, we want to set up a spreadsheet. We've got the responses in a column and start adding issues as we come across them and start tallying those responses. And you can see kind of a rubric for that over here on the right. On the left here, I mentioned a little bit of the stats. Generally, with open-ended type of questions and responses, you're going to want around 200 to 250 of the responses in order for there to be a proper confidence interval that the strength of signal of your issue is actually valid. And so if 20% of the people are having problems with shipping per se, there's a confidence interval around that 20% that makes you be confident that your population of consumers actually have that same strength of signal for that issue. And there's links to dive in more into these stats if you'd like. Wrapping up, so 4 key takeaways here. 1, you need to be strategic about your research. You can't let your nomenclature, you can't let the jargon, you can't let these best practices be distracting from what you're looking to get and how you're looking to fold that data in and then process it and then push it out there to your customers and solve your customer problems effectively, right? You need to start or expand how you collect voice of customer data. I just showed these 4 different buckets of areas that you can start collecting voice of customer data on. This is effectively our playbook for how we go about it. I guarantee you that no one does all of them. So start to expand on how you collect the data. Don't survey for survey's sake, or don't collect data for data's sake. You have to have these explicit goals in mind, and don't cross-pollinate. Don't have multiple goals for one technique. Be really surgical there. And finally, you've got to act. You've got to experiment. You can't just collect data and create a plan. You've got to push out these experiments and push out these tests that all of this data helps to support. So that's that final takeaway there. And lastly, my final point. If you're not collecting a lot of this data, then someone else is. Here are a bunch of screenshots from Google. They, in the last year, have been incredibly aggressive at collecting voice of customer feedback. What does this mean? This is really powerful. If you can think of any company out there in the world that has more data on customers and would maybe not need to collect voice of customer data, that would maybe not have a customer blind spot, it would be Google. Yet look how aggressive they are at collecting voice of customer data. They are incredibly aggressive about it. And what this means is, what this implies is that voice of customer data is going from a nice to have to an absolute must. Because digital experience is trumping everything today. It's more important than price. It's more important than quality. If you make things frictionless and easy for your customers, they will come back again and again and again. They're having these watershed moments, especially with regards to these mobile payment gateways and how those are changing the game. And what this speaks to as well is that who you think your competitors are actually not your competitors. If you're selling jewelry online, your competitors are not other jewelry makers. Your competitors are Google, Uber, Netflix. They are the companies that are listening and speaking to their customers and making and creating these frictionless experiences. They are raising the bar for expectations of our customers these days. And so if you are not following suit, if you are not as well creating these frictionless experiences, then you're going to fall behind, regardless of what your competitors are doing, right? Your direct competitors. So with that, I've got a bunch of resource links here at the bottom, and I will stop the presentation here and hand it back over to Paresh.
All right. No, thank you, Ben. I was saying it's a great presentation, really insightful. I was recently reading a report from Gartner, which mentioned that by 2020, experiences are going to overtake price, product, pretty much everything, and companies are going to be built on experience. And I hope everyone learned a lot from your session today. With that, I do have a couple of questions, if I could quickly ask them. So the first one is, you spoke about the SuperQ, the standardized survey. If you could talk a little bit about, the process to implement it, how long does it take, how many people do you really need? And once you have collected this data, right, for somebody who is just for the first time collecting something like this, typically, how do they connect that data to the larger goal? And one of your slides also mentioned that you need to use that data into some action. So how do you typically go about that from a process perspective?
Yeah, so the SuperQ, or these types of standardized surveys, You think of it kind of like user testing, but a bit at scale. And here we're not, looking at behavior, but perceptions. And so you get people, at least 100, ideally, maybe 150, 200 people to go through that digital experience and then answer a survey after. So you need a panel. Just that panel might be, $500, $1,000 to charge, and then you're setting up your survey tool and stuff like that. So it's not out of this world expensive to execute, but there's a time to process all of that data. How you bring this in, so understanding where you are in terms of that benchmark number means nothing. You have to compare it, right, to something else. So again, longitudinally, so you're collecting those types of benchmarks over time, and you're seeing where things are shifting. Or that competitive sense that I showed in the example in the presentation. So you're putting yourself against another website, right? And if you see that you fall behind in a particular area, or there's through time there's an indicator that's lagging, then that provides a point of priority for that area. So if you're, for example, get some kind of data point that speaks to people not having as much trust, that credibility benchmark is not so good. The tests that speak and and the actions that might help increase trust and credibility on the site, you might bump those up in your prioritization framework, your test plan, that kind of thing. So that's how it would fold into your test plan effectively.
Sure, that sounds great. And strategically, what bucket or area of qualitative research really impacts you in building quality hypothesis, right? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so we went through that playbook, and we've got those 4 buckets, those 4 areas that we kind of speak to. I would say motivation is the biggest one. So as a conversion heuristic, so to speak, customer motivation is the strongest sort of knob, dial to turn. When we're thinking about what changes customer behavior the strongest. And so understanding, from the, getting voice of customer data on what's motivating them, how do they describe it, how do they put those in their words, that's usually the area that we put the strongest emphasis. In fact, in our prioritization framework, the PXL model, we have a metric that specifically, does this test affect customer motivation, or does it address customer motivation? And if it does, there's a point score there that contributes to the ranking of the test ideas. So the test ideas that speak to motivation are going to be ranked higher. So yeah.
Great. So I think that brings us to the end of this session. Typically, we like to end this session with a little question about you. And so I think we would love to know, what books are you currently reading? Any book that you would recommend to the audience that you really liked recently? And how can they connect with you if they have any questions or anything that they want to chat with you about?
Sure, yeah. So books, I just I'm right towards the end of a book called Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. I think it's Keith, last name I just doubted myself on. But it's kind of a leadership and especially with regards to management and also business operations in terms, asking the right questions and getting, instead of trying to find solutions, it's all about strategically, being smarter strategically, I would say. And then the other book, more relevant to this talk, I think, that I finished maybe within the last 6 months, a great book. It's called Culture Map by Aaron Meyer. And it's a book that speaks to the pitfalls of working across cultures. So colleagues, partners, clients, if you're working across cultures, understanding these scales of how cultures, perceptions differ on communication, time, feedback, and how, in one culture, criticism can be constructive, but that's in another culture, that same criticism can be destructive. And so it's really powerful. If you think about voice of customer, if you're trying to localize a program and working with customers in one market versus another, it becomes really, really powerful. Yeah. And then in terms of how to get in touch with me, I'm LinkedIn is a good place. Twitter, I'm on there at Ben LeBay. And then through the agency, you can email me directly. Yeah.
Great. So thank you so much for your time today, Ben. We really appreciate it, and you have a great day ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Prash. Have a good one. Bye.